The future we want, the United Nations we need. Shaping our future together, Ghana and the United Nations. And Ghana will use the 75th anniversary of the world body to continue to evolve its presence and association in the organization and to pledge its commitment to the UN Charter. A charter which was spelled out by the founding fathers at their meeting at San Francisco, United States in October 24, 1945. The musings and reflections of Ghana's Minister of Foreign Affairs and Regional Integration, the Honorable Shirley Ayokobotwe, and the resident coordinator of the United Nations in Ghana, Mr. Charles Abani, will set the stage and the tone for this documentary.
The United Nations, 75 years since its formation, has dynamically evolved, keeping its focus, adapting to change, and contributing in diverse ways to maintaining international peace and security, promoting human rights and fundamental freedoms, respect for international law, and in advancing socioeconomic development for humanity. On this occasion, we have the opportunity to reflect on the achievements, challenges, and lessons learned.
The United Nations was established in the aftermath of the Second World War to safeguard the peace, to protect human rights, to provide a framework for international justice, and to promote social and economic prosperity and wealth. It's best captured in those 5 Ps: planet, people, peace, partnership, and prosperity. That's what the UN is about, and it's encapsulated in the SDG goals that we are all fighting to achieve in this last decade of action.
The evolution of man stumbles on a mixed bag. It discovers underdevelopment, poverty, disease, squalor, and terrorism of all kinds, you name them. It also discovers positives such as invention, science, technology, productivity, also you name them. Now, the poignant period, obviously a scar on the conscience of humanity, was World War I and others. World War I leaving in its trail deaths of about 70 million people, 100,000 of them being American troops.
Despite the challenges it faces, we celebrate the United Nations for its presence and principles, charting the path to peace and security for humanity. World War I was technically the first outbreak of war on global scale, with weapons of mass destruction at full play. It was a bubble burst of a build-up that will find an outlet. As nations built mutual defense alliances, it served notice of the pending danger which arrived in June 1914 at the start of the First World War. Of course, additional factors included imperialism, as world powers were locked in a struggle to control territory and resources. They fought their way, and by the turn of the 20th century, an arms race had begun as to determine which country possessed the greatest warhead. By 1918, many independent nations outside the scope of the two groups joined the fray when it became clear that the Central Forces were losing to the Allied forces. Germany was on the losing side as the Allied forces cut the lifeline of the German troops in France and Belgium. At the Paris Conference of January 1920, a peace treaty was signed by world powers to bring World War I to a close. However, the world's maiden intergovernmental organization, the League of Nations, headed to failure, and by 1939, a Second World War was firmly in place. The weak structure and the absence of the United States from its membership provided the coup de grace. In spite of the demerits, League of Nations was pivotal to the consensus-building culture which endures to present day by and large. Germany was at it again, invading Poland in 1939. Pent-up feelings unleashed as Adolf Hitler went out of his way to regain lost territory. That triggered Europe's Worst Holocaust in the 1940s. The Axis powers, Germany, Italy and Japan, faced the might of the Allied forces led by the United States, France and Great Britain in what appeared to reveal a measured reorganization of alliances. That was World War II, but its intensity began to wane when the Allied forces invaded Germany. Berlin was captured, Adolf Hitler committed suicide, and Germany surrendered completely by May 1945. It changed the political order and social structure of the globe. Soon after World War II, some 51 countries came together to form the United Nations, this time with the presence of the United States. The nations signed a charter to act as concerted units to promote and maintain international peace, security, human rights, and to create wealth. It was a decisive mission to stamp out the deadly confrontations aided by sophisticated weapons. Franklin D. Roosevelt, President of the United States, coined the name United Nations, and it officially became operational 24th October 1945. The charter invites all peace-loving nations to join the organization. Organs of the United Nations became the General Assembly, where debates are held and recommendations are made. The Security Council, which determines what constitutes threat to peace and security with practical steps to contain dangers, and the Secretariat, which plays the substantive or administrative roles of the organization. The other organs are the Economic and Social Council, the International Court of Justice, and the Trusteeship Council, now defunct. These, in addition to the United Nations architecture, specialized agencies, funds, programs, commodity agreements, and training institutions, constitute the UN system of organizations. The Secretary General at the Secretariat is the UN Chief and the face of the organization. Initiatives or motions tabled in the General Assembly is subject to the veto of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, which can promote or block any initiative. 10 non-permanent members are elected to a term of 2 years. The following are UN Secretary Generals since the inception of the organization: Gladwin Jebb of the United Kingdom, 1945 to 1946. Trygve Lie of Norway, 1946 to 1952. Dag Hammarskjöld of Sweden, 1953 to 1961. And U Thant of Burma, 1961 to 1971. The rest are Austria's Kurt Waldheim from 1972 to 1981. And from 1982 to 1991, Peruvian Javier Perez Duquela took over. Africa came into the picture when Egypt's Boutros Boutros-Ghali was appointed between 1992 to 1996, dovetailed by the 2-term Kofi Annan of Ghana from 1996 to 2006. Ban Ki-moon of South Korea took his turn in 2007, ending his tenure in 2016, before Portugal's Antonio Guterres assumed office. Up to 1991 were the heady days of the Cold War that wedged the world into 2 halves along Eastern and Western blocs. Irreconcilable ideological differences that saw the Soviet Union lead communism and the United States capitalism. The Iron Curtain drew the world to the brink of war, and insecurity was palpably felt in the atmosphere as the 2 powers and their allies embarked on armaments and proliferated nuclear warheads. The Cold War came to an end following a wave of peaceful revolutions that swept the Soviet bloc states of Eastern Europe in 1989, the end of Soviet occupation in Afghanistan, and the pulling down of the Berlin Wall, which was symbol of the ideological divide between West and East Germany. Consistent with her foreign policy, Ghana took to the non-aligned movement, whose members, mainly from the developing world, declared neutrality and independence in the Cold War. Formed by Yugoslav President Josip Broz Tito, the principles of the non-aligned movement are in tandem with the planks of Ghana's foreign policy, which are Pan-Africanism, ideological neutrality, and good neighborliness. Still, the experts talk of a new world order in the 21st century, characterized by yet another Cold War, with Russia and China trying to assert control in what looks like a 3-horse race for global leadership.
Joseph Nye's title was clear: bound to lead. So who was bound to lead? America, of course. Naturally then, other countries. In the theory of hegemony, once you see somebody trying to be a hegemon, you want to either pull him down or try to be at par with him. It's natural in international politics. Russia decided also to find a way to reassert itself. And so it came gradually until Putin came, and he has been part of the old system structure. So gradually it built its arsenal, gradually it asserted itself, and today, and again, it was because of a defensive measure they needed, because NATO, in the triumphalist approach that I was talking about, NATO was crawling towards the borders of Russia, trying to take all the old Soviet satellite states to its ambit. Naturally, it would rise. So its rise afforded China also the sense of taking part of the world to itself. And China went through mostly the economic and military. Whilst building their military powers highly, they were trying to infiltrate into every corner of the world.
Unilateral actions leading to wars backed by alliance forces are called out by some political scientists as the new war confronting the United Nations.
There's no third world war, but there's a third world war. It's a localized third world war. And people, countries and regions are experiencing their form of third world war, and others are not, based on the success of the UN, but more importantly on the success of those member countries and the regions such as we have in ECOWAS and Africa and other regions as well.
There is a seriously new Cold War between America and the rest of the world. The rest meaning especially China and Russia. And they would wish China and Russia would not come together as good friends against American power. Meanwhile, smaller states are trying to challenge American power, and America is not happy. Smaller states like Iran, North Korea.
A Ghanaian ambassador at large, Kwabena Osei Dankwa, believes that the UN has more problems to grapple with, aside from ammunition wars. He says whilst the charter of the organization commits it to interaction among states at the governmental level, the reality is that it is swamped by non-state actors, which are increasingly becoming powerful and dictate the pace of the global order.
The UN today is not the UN of 1945. It is not the UN even of the Cold War period, where the UN could exercise influence because there was competition and differences among a few powers, with countries aligning with one superpower or the other. And it's also not like the UN when there was only one superpower able to influence the outcomes of things. Now you have a more multipolar world, but a more polarized world. So we have a situation where no country can actually decide and pull along the rest of the membership, and neither do we have poles in the different regions that can bring the countries together along consensus. So the UN is actually fractured, and as it is now, it is not positioned to respond to the kinds of critical issues that the world faces. And
this is corroborated by others.
For countries like Ghana, for almost all African countries and developing countries in general, the UN is still a vital institution playing a very important role, not only to maintain international peace and security, to prevent another world war from breaking out, but especially in tackling the issues of hunger and disease and unemployment, empowering women, helping take care of children, and helping the world manage the new institutions we are dealing with. You know, how do we deal with Facebook? How do we handle Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon, these giant Google, these giant entities which are now playing so much of a role in our lives. We need a global institution where everybody's voice can be heard in deciding how we deal with these institutions.
The new drift in international relations is to pardon views of national populations as mandate upon which to negotiate for peace and other solutions.
Even the way that decisions are made in the UN have to change. Leaders and governments have to engage their citizens before they go to the big conferences. Because otherwise, if you come back and you say, this is what we agreed, they will say, well, we were not there. And we've seen it in some countries that democratically elected governments no longer feel so strong about the outcomes of meetings at the UN, because when you go home, you now have to negotiate with your people.
A former Ghana deputy ambassador to the UN, William Awinado Kanyerige, says the media must get involved in educating the public on international topics.
We should help our people to understand how the UN works. The UN is an intergovernmental body, and like my colleague Ambassador Said Dankwa mentioned, there has been, we've experienced some shifts. The space is opening up for non-state actors. In fact, not only that, if you recall, when Kofi Annan was Secretary General of the UN, President Konaré of Mali became chairperson of the AU. Dr. Chambers was ECOWAS Commission president. There was this synergy of opening up the space to non-state actors, especially in West Africa and in Africa as a whole, and not just at the UN. Okay. Yeah. So this dynamic has been going on. The way the GE organizes its meetings is not only governmental meetings. There are also CSO meetings. There are meetings that are governmental that are open to CSOs. Okay, and so they also leverage personalities who are not necessarily working in government in that collaboration.
He says creation of the Council on Foreign Relations in Ghana is another step to fill the gaps by engaging all functioning groups about foreign policy.
The international system is one built on equality of states. And these states have created a body called the UN. And the UN is supposed to help us to maintain international peace and security, promote shared values, and promote shared development and sustainability. Okay. But the reality is that states are different. They are different in terms of power and influence. And for an international organization to work, it works as much as the member states, its units, allow it to succeed. Conversely, it will fail as much as its member states allow it to fail. Now, because of that space of differentiated influence capacity, some countries exercise more influence than others. So it's up to the individual countries to organize themselves and see how best they can leverage their interest at that world stage. Again, it brings me back to the relevance of the think tank, Council on Foreign Relations, in complementing the human resource that we have already, not just in the foreign ministry, but of course in other areas of the governance system.
Ambassador Kwabena said Dankwa, one-time chief of the cabinet of the 73rd President of the UN General Assembly, Maria Fernandez Espinosa of Ecuador, urges the UN to abide by its multipolar traditions.
If you look at the political situation around the world, there's a rise in nationalism, in unilateralism, and in fact in isolationism, at a time when we need more multilateralism to face the big challenges of the world.
Enter Dr. Vladimir Nchidanso, the Dean of Academic Affairs of the Ghana Armed Forces Command and Staff College. He says actions and inactions of powerful nations cripple the United Nations.
Once people think that you are too unilateralist, they will challenge you, and that challenge is coming. The UN is so incapable of halting this. They can only talk and plead. They can only, because what the UN is talking about is always trying to make sure that people sat down and talk. Sit, talk, stop the arms race, and that kind of, that's the best thing, because they don't have what it takes to stamp somebody from. There are several UN resolutions which are being disobeyed, and they talk about it. For example, the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, which the Americans have gone away from, has enabled Russia to increase, and has allowed America to increase the arsenals. The UN say, please, can you stop this and talk? That's the best that UN can do.
Syria, Iran, and Venezuela have all been new theaters of high-end conflicts which have attracted and tested the propensity to war by the big powers. In all situations, one had served as a check on the other, thereby avoiding face-to-face combat. Now, in Syria, for instance, the US began to withdraw troops just as the Russians weighed in, a clear indication that none want a direct military confrontation. Good news for a pacifist organization like the United Nations. After all, peace is a prerequisite for development.
The UN was founded on the ashes of war. Whilst we have moved forward in peace building and peacemaking and ensuring that we prevent the outbreak of full world war, we still have threats to this, and that is reflected in the nuclear arms that are scattered around the world. And there seems to be some hesitance, or maybe, let me put it, nuclear weapon possessing states do not want to have those weapons taken away. But it's a threat to all of us. It's an existential threat. So we've been very vocal there. And then in the area of small arms and light weapons, Ghana was able to lead in getting ammunitions included in the treaties that are to regulate small arms and light weapons.
One Ghanaian celebrated in all circles is former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan. He is reported to have risen through the UN structures from the scratch to the ultimate position. But then, he is partnered by another Ghanaian, Ni Alote Odunton, in that respect. He too rose through the ranks to become an Under-Secretary General for the International Seabed Authority of the Law of the Sea. The two are only ones to have achieved this feat when they were continuing staff of the United Nations up to the position of Under-Secretary General, after which Kofi Annan moved ahead to become the Secretary General.
In many ways, Mr. Kofi Annan was the highest point of Ghana's presence in the United Nations, and he was much admired and highly respected. But his name rings many bells. There are others who have served with distinction, and I certainly am very proud to be their compatriots.
Not just because he was a Ghanaian, but he was a Ghanaian who did great things. He effectively can be seen as the most consequential Secretary General of the United Nations, because he was able to assert the UN Charter in terms of the jockeying by the superpowers. He was able to assert the role of the Secretary General.
Ambassador Patrick Hayford, a former Ghana High Commissioner to South Africa with a strong career interface with the United Nations, revealed one of the 3 books which bear the letters of Kofi Annan. He says many other Ghanaians joins Kofi Annan in making Ghana proud at the United Nations. Dr. Robert Gardner, he became director at the UN as early as 1948, the first since establishment of the organization in 1945. In 1964, Alex Kwesi-Saki also became the first African to be elected president of the UN General Assembly. The list includes lawyer Ekwia Kwenyehia, International Criminal Court, Mary Chiniri Hesse, Deputy Director General of the International Labour Organization. As Foreign Minister, President Akufo-Addo at one time became President of the UN Security Council. Dr. Mohamed Ibn Chambers as the Secretary General's representative in West and Sahel region of Africa. Professor Alex Kwapong, Vice Rector of the United Nations University. Professor F.T. Sai, recipient of 1993 UN Prize on Reproductive Health, Population and Nutrition. Nana Dr. S.K.B. Asante, Director of the UN Center for Transnational Corporations. Kenneth Dazi, Director General, UN Conference on Trade and Development. Dr. K.Y. Amwakon, Executive Secretary of the UN Economic Commission in Africa. And General Timothy Buama, who served as Secretary to the Military Advisor of Paris Duquela. Generals Emmanuel Eskin and Seth Obeng became force commanders at different stages in UN peace operations in Lebanon. Dr. Thomas Mensah was the first president of the International Tribunal of the Sea. Former BBC correspondent Ghanaian Ben Doche Malo is with the Communications Directorate of the United Nations in New York. Ghana's ambassador to the UN, Her Excellency Martha Pobi, have up her sleeves another Ghanaian who played yeoman's role in the affairs of the UN.
About 50 years ago, one of our top diplomats, Ambassador Dazi, not many people know of him, Emmanuel Dazi, he proposed the establishment of a UN program that was meant to enhance capacity building in international law. At that time in 1963, many African countries were just emerging from colonialism. We had just had our independence. And he noticed a lack of knowledge in these areas, because without that, you cannot negotiate on an equal footing. And then also international law, respect for international law, allows countries to live at peace with each other and to be able to promote lasting international peace and security. And therefore, for the past 50 years, Ghana has chaired the advisory committee to this program, and we've managed to get it on the budget of the United Nations, regular budget. It's funded. It trains diplomats or lawyers in Africa, Asia, and Latin America.
Pictured here is Ghana's founding president, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, with UN Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld in the North Public Lobby at the UN headquarters in New York. On the 8th of March, 2 days after political independence from the United Kingdom, Ghana applied to become a member of the United Nations. Ghana lobbied the United Nations to fast-track the decolonization process, and by 1960, 17 African states had also achieved independence. Here is Ambassador Agnes Aggrey-Ollens and others in echo of that epoch.
And those were the heydays of decolonization. Now, these discussions were held in the 4th Committee of the General Assembly. And we were guided, of course, the Ghana delegation, of course, was guided by its foreign policy, a tenet of which was the famous statement of Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, then our Prime Minister, and subsequently our President, to the effect that the independence of Ghana was meaningless unless it was linked with the total liberation of the African continent.
The UN was used in order to prosecute an agenda of total liberation of Africa. And so in 1960, we were able to push and get the UN to pass a resolution 1514, granting independence to colonized countries and territories.
Other memorable photographs include the visit to Ghana by UN Secretary General U Thant in the time of Prime Minister Professor Kofi Abrefa Buzia, and the New York visit of Asante Hene, King of Ashanti Kingdom in Ghana, to address the UN on role of traditional rulers in peace building and development.
The role of Otumfuo in terms of helping to mediate and build peace in the country. So for me, it wasn't a surprise that he was invited because the former Emir of Kano was also in one of the side meetings of the UN General Assembly. So it's not the first time it's happening, but it is a recognition of the work that Otumfuo is doing, particularly in Ghana. Of course, he may be doing outside Ghana as well, but particularly in Ghana in terms of promoting what is termed infrastructures of peace.
President Jerry John Rawlings addressed the year 2000 UN Millennium Summit, whilst Presidents John Ejekun Kufuor, John Evans Atta Mills, John Mahama and Nana Akufo-Addo took their turns to address the UN General Assembly meetings of heads of state and government. Vice Presidents Alhaji Aliyu Mahama, Pa Kwesi Misa Arthur and Dr. Mahamadou Bawumia also performed roles at the United Nations. Whilst President Kufuor was at one point named by UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon as UN Climate Ambassador, President John Dramani Mahama took the insignia, the Ambassador of UN Habitat. Both Presidents Mahama and Akufo-Addo were named co-chairs of the UN Eminent Panel on the Sustainable Development Goals (SDGs). It is a seat for Ghana's occupancy, with Norway as the other co-chair. It is a recognition of Ghana's steady progress in accord with the Millennium and the Sustainable Development Goals.
Ghana takes the SDGs extremely seriously. Prior to COVID, it was already integrated into the medium-term expenditure framework, and there is actual SDG budgeting taking place in Ghana. In the wake of COVID and Ghana's very strong and robust and proactive response to COVID, the SDGs have not been left behind. There have been recent fairs and activities to bolster and generate the resources, the massive resources that Ghana needs in order to achieve the SDGs. This is important, and the reviews that Ghana is conducting, the National Voluntary Review, is a critical process to understand exactly where it is in achieving these important goals, and also to acknowledge the devastating impact of COVID-19 in order to reprioritize and ensure that we're all working towards the achievement of these goals. The United Nations itself has reprogrammed significant sums of its money to assist the Ghana government in its aim to recover from the pandemic and to grow and expand.
We must celebrate the progress made in the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, for which the President of the Republic, His Excellency Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, as co-chair of the SDGs, has provided leadership in mainstreaming the goals and indicators into Ghana's National Development Plan.
UN Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld died in a plane crash in DR Congo in 1961. Incidentally, the Congo War in the 1960s marked Ghana's second experience in international peacekeeping operations. During World War II, some 65,000 Ghanaian soldiers were under the command of British colonial officers in the Royal West African Frontier Force to serve in Burma. Today, Ghana is within bracket of the top 10 contributors to the United Nations peacekeeping operations. Ghanaian Army General Henry Kwame Anyidoho was appointed the Deputy Force Commander and Chief of Staff of the United Nations Assistance Mission in Rwanda in 1994. According to him, the UN sent about 250 troops to Rwanda at the request of the warring factions, who had a truce, but soon things spiraled out of control when the plane carrying President Juvenal Habyarimana was shot down. What followed was a spontaneous ethnic cleansing, he recounted.
The president was going around to see if his colleague, other presidents could help. So then on the 6th, he was coming back from one of these visits when his plane was shot down. And that was it. That was the end of what we had gone there to do as a peacekeeping mission. The actions that followed, the rampant killing of the people, was like a rehearsed program. The speed at which Rwandese were killing Rwandese was like a rehearsed program. And we couldn't understand because they spoke the same language. They intermarried before we got there. So the whole thing took us by surprise. But then we had to try and do what we could under the circumstances because if we didn't, who will? So it was good that we were on the ground. We didn't have enough armament to face that kind of situation. But we had a role to play, we didn't have a choice. So when the two other countries, Bangladesh and Belgium, decided to pull out, Ghana, we thought we should not.
Rwanda's High Commissioner to Ghana, Dr. Aissa Kirabo Kasiara, bemoans the circumstances leading to the genocide in her country, acknowledges the tenacity of Ghanaian troops in the turbulence of 1994, and upholds the important role of the United Nations in the affairs of man ever going forward.
For us back at home in Rwanda, that hits hard because we have a real experience in 1994 when we most needed support from the international community and the UN was not able to deliver. We lost over 1 million lives, and some of these people probably could have hidden, but they couldn't because they trusted the international community to come and protect them. But it fell short of that. So at home we have decided to deeply reflect on what happened and make very intentional choices. And I want to say with all humility, Rwanda chose to be an active member of the UN.
It was precisely due to concerns such as those expressed by the Rwandan High Commissioner in Ghana that a former Canadian Prime Minister Jean Chrétien suggested the establishment of an international commission on intervention and state sovereignty. The commission was to determine the levels of conflict and at what stage the international community must react to intervene.
This is the Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Training Center, KIPTC, in Accra, Ghana. Government of Ghana established the center to enhance regional security and policy dialogue through training of non-civilian and civilian partakers in peace operations. The Director of Policy, Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation of KIPTC, Sylvia Honam Nwagbesenu Nuchukwi, says the center has introduced courses taking into account the special concerns and role of women in conflict situations.
Let me mention from the start that the setup of the Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Training Center was established in 1998, and the reason for doing this was because Ghana at the time had gained a lot of experience and knowledge in peacekeeping and promoting peace building. And so the Ghana Armed Forces wanted to set up this establishment as part of its institution in order to increase the knowledge that it had acquired at the time on the continent with our neighboring countries in contributing to the UN's mandate on peace and security.
All the personalities affirmed belief in the United Nations in the midst of a world full of challenges.
Many of the challenges that we're facing today are global. And no single country or even region can be able to effectively handle them. I think there's no better example than the COVID-19 pandemic that I think humbled all of us and made us realize that it's only through partnership and global partnership that we can be able to address it. And therefore, the role of the UN is key.
The United Nations is not a body apart from the member states. Member states are the United Nations. We are the United Nations. And the United Nations is as effective as member states permitted to be through mutual understanding and cooperation.
If you look at the fate of our planet, the last year the UN issued a global assessment of the ecosystem and found that about 1 million animal and plant species were at risk of extinction. Just think about that. And then in terms of climate, we had agreed in Paris that in the next 10 years, we have to work to ensure that we could keep global climate temperature rising to 1.5 degrees.
The shifts in the demographics of the world. And in this shifts, I need to emphasize it, that Africa is going to play a very key role, because the youth bulge in Africa is going to be the leading factor in demographic shifts in the next couple of decades. And if we don't manage it well, we will lose out. If we manage it well, we will occupy the place that we deserve in the world in terms of leveraging our youth and emerging digital technologies.
It's a good time for Ghana. Ghana is very much respected. And I feel this all the time everywhere I go. I remember the Secretary General saying once that Ghana is a small country, but it's certainly performing above its size. And that goes to show that though we are small, our voice goes very far. Our diplomacy is very kind of refined. Our positions, we don't go for the hardline positions. We're always a moderating influence when it comes to multilateralism. Our strong support for the multilateral format for the UN, as you already mentioned, also has given us the confidence that member states have in us. And hence, they are always looking at us to play certain roles. So we are very respected and we are seen everywhere. And so if you are a member of my mission, if you are an ambassador and permanent representative, it means you should be ready to do more. 24 hours you're on duty, literally, because on every issue, they want to talk to you.
The reform of the UN Security Council is critical to the maintenance of international peace and security in view of the current geopolitical realities of our time. Let me conclude by applauding the work of the United Nations in Ghana and to pledge our unflinching support and solidarity to the organization in advancing the cause of humanity. We also urge all member states to remain true to the Charter and to the principles and values that establishes the foundations of our global community.
Ghana is a confirmed multilateral actor and has been a member of the United Nations since 1958. By 1960, Ghana was already contributing to global peace by contributing to international peacekeeping forces and has over 3,000 people actively in service across different parts of the world, even as we speak today, and is in the top 10 of contributors to global peace. Ghana has also provided a raft of professionals into the UN system, not least, of course, our brother Kofi Annan, two-time Secretary General of the United Nations. There have been many Ghanaians, too many to mention here, who have contributed to global progress in the United Nations and that firm belief in multilateralism. Of course, the President of Ghana is chair of the SDG's Eminent Persons Group, and in his role also as ECOWAS chair promotes the very principles and values that the UN stands for.
The UN we have and the UN we want to have, the UN we need. What we have is not good. So we must think of what we need to have. And they must whip up all countries to know that the demise of the UN is the demise of the globe.
Across its journey, the United Nations, its specialized agencies, related agencies, funds, programs, and staff have been awarded the prestigious Nobel Peace Prize 12 times. No other individual or group than the United Nations. None like that. The UN, the effective peace broker in the world.
It is precisely within the spirit of the UN Charter, particularly the principle of good neighborliness, that Ghana sought an amicable solution to the maritime boundary dispute with its western neighbor, La Côte d'Ivoire, by seeking interpretation on the laws of the ITLOS. ITLOS is an acronym for the International Law of the Sea. Ghana continued to rededicate itself to the spirit and principles and the laws of the United Nations as it plows into the future, springing forth from the 75th anniversary of the United Nations.